That's farthest back.
Well, no,
You know,
not the furthest back. But.
But you know, I think about how many years I kept this little thing in the drawer, in my drawer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's such a magical little piece, and I think it's the nostalgia not only of you and of the preciousness of it, of the box, preciousness of you, but also the little Kodak box, you know.
You know, the nostalgia of the box, which was old when the piece was made, was you know, found and out of time in a way.
Fleeting moment becomes a representation for the fleeting years.
Right. Right.
You know, for the fleeting nature of life. You know, it's just they become symbols.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think the way we always try to use the entrance to prefigure the whole exhibition. I think as we go through here with the hand coloring and the round shots and the wide lux pictures and the nudes, and then the really early work that for me began the 35 millimeter that I feel is the core of my work. It's really interesting that we kind of did capture a little bit of everything in this very small place, even the experimental ginkgos.
That was the idea, you know, that the entryway encapsulates explorations of a lifetime, of 40 years, you know.
Right.
And it's almost uncanny the way they succinctly speak to one another with what seems to be such disparate voices, whether it be subject differences, presentation differences, subject, you know, process differences, just works.
Yeah. Titles are very important to us, and when we think about it, the map of how we got here, which begins to tell us where we're going, and the repeating motifs, whether it's words and images, whether it's books, whether it's containers, whether it's a interest in the print statement as an important part of the expression, the sequencing. And I think even the show itself becomes another art piece that both of us have spent a lot of time thinking about. What is the experience of the gallery goer? What is the experience of a person who walks in one entrance versus another entrance? And just like a book like Traveler, Geir's book, that either is read in the Western version from one area or in the Japanese style from the other side, and that was conscious. We're also conscious that our viewers are going to see the show in different ways, and the decision of where they come in and what they see and the rhythm that they experience the show at becomes yet another piece of art for us. I think your most recent work with the fisheye lens, as well as my most recent work of the one poem books. It's interesting that they ended up across from each other.
Oh, right.
And
you think that's coincidental? I can't say it was conscious.
Right. And I think that's what's interesting about what ends up happening, is that because we were conscious of hitting some of the early work, of making sure we had representations of some of the early projects, and yet also wanting to show that we were making things now. And
yes, we're still creating.
That's right.
Yes,
right.
Yeah.
But I think the fisheye pictures and their magicalness and the way that they feel like crystal balls talking again about the future in a way. Visions of different worlds, and so much echoing the circles to the kind of theme of circles that happens in the images that we selected to put up for my one poem books.
Curating a show of our own work is much more difficult than curating work of others, but being able to distance oneself enough to look at those juxtapositions that you're creating for your viewer, for the audience, then brings with it the gift of a different kind of understanding of our own creations, if I can say.
Right.
I just love this wall. It's like they came home from college, you know?
They came home to visit.
Yeah, they came home to visit. Oh, it's so nice that they're here, Kate. Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
They sure have done well in the world.
Well, it's interesting too, though, because of the nature of the show. It is not likely that in any other context that these particular four would be together.
All right.
And that's an interesting thing. I think we can see the same thing over here, which
I
really enjoy how these four sit together and really express to me some of the magic of my work.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they've all shown, but they may be shown with regional, some work of Japan, work of New Zealand, Australia, or they've shown as part of World Heritage, so speaking about the World Heritage sites that they come from. And so it's really interesting to see them here simply as photographs that speak to spirit. And so it is another interpretation of how they exist that comes from the call of this show to try to symbolize so much work with even as large it is with so few images. I mean, again, these four images represent probably 7 boxes full of prints, and even more that have not even yet been printed.
Yeah.
And I think that's again what comes next. I look at these and I think all the other images that are still just negatives, and I think of all the other images that are waiting to be realized in projects, and it's just exciting.
Let's talk about this a little. How does it feel now, having lived with those for a couple of months?
Well, I think we're back to that same thing. Would I on my own have put so much of this show in that particular work? Probably not. Does it work as a wall? I think with your nudes and with the whole, it does really work as a show. And that was one of the interesting parts of the process of making the show, was the challenge that every piece that went up, there was 10 that didn't get to go up.
Sure.
And to think of some of the other work that, we could redo this show and have an entire another show.
Yeah.
And not have anything duplicated. It's wonderful, and it's a torture.
Yeah.
Sometimes people will ask, how do you know if something's finished? How, if you know something's done, how do you know if something's good? And certainly, since both of us have experience in teaching and curating and working with artists, those questions come up. And one of the things, and I think in putting together this show, this comes to the forefront, is a sense that when something is really good, I was part of it existing, but I don't feel a connection with it has a life of its own now.
This is amazing that you're saying this. I just need to interject, because when we took the break now, I was sitting thinking, okay, so where do we want to go next? And I thought about the very same thing. That I'm sitting in front of these particular images that
from Searching for True North,
that are they are complete.
Right.
They're like children in the world that you happen to have had a part in raising.
You were present, but and if someone says I didn't like it, those particular images, it's not every image, but those images that you just really know are good and are done and have this life of their own. If someone says they didn't like it, it would be like, well, that's interesting. Why don't you like it? But it's not. There's no ego thing that goes back to it, because literally, it exists beside you.
It's in the world.
It goes to that idea of that amazing book, The Gift, where it is like a gift that comes to you. In the end, the image it either works in the world, it either speaks to people. My experience of it is one circle, and everyone else's experience crosses that circle. But it only lives in that they have that experience, that someone else can look at it and feel something. And that is true of each of the images, and then it becomes even more true of the larger projects. When you think about the Circle of Life with the fisheye lens, when you think about the one poem books for me, how they're done, and yet the idea seems like it could go on forever. And I think that, why can't you just do a couple more? I have the poems, I have the permissions, and yet as an event, as an experience, they're done.
Yeah, cliches abound. You know, the work tells me when it's done. You know, the book writes itself. You know, there's truth to all of them, and that's the profundity in it. That something just says it's done. Really interesting. Someone asked about whether that was even real yesterday.
Really?
Because it was. She said she felt like she could touch rust. And you know, the era of manipulation, right? She was wondering what you had done to it in Photoshop was the question. And I didn't even know how to act, you know, like, what do you mean, what have we done to it in Photoshop?
Right.
But it's something that we have to be you know, what is it? You're responsible for what the viewers feel and see. I mean, what do we do with that today?
Yeah. Well, I know it's interesting because that sort of brings up the fact that we both have skills with using the digital image, with using Photoshop, with using printing in the darkroom. And there is an interpretation in every image. I mean, that picture out of the camera did not look like that. And at the same time, the adjustments were to make it feel like what it really felt like in the world. Yeah. And that sort of, I think that's a core that we have in our work, is that the manipulations, such as they are, the adjustments, such as they are to make it feel like what it really felt like, rather than to transform it. Remaining
true, as much as true can be true.
What is true, yeah.
Well, I mean, true is that the wires were really there, the shadows were really there, and things weren't taken out and added in. That's my feeling of true. And I hope to remain there for the rest of my career, that you can expect a degree of veracity in my photography. That's something important to me.
But yeah, and I think it's, I mean, as we have many colleagues and many people we admire who choose to create images out of different things, I think the preference to merely be a witness on some level is just another choice, and it's a choice that works for the ideas we're trying to express.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
You know,
yeah, I mean, those are cut out pieces and they're glued together, and I think that.
But they're really obvious. It's not, and I think that's one of the hard lines what you talk about when someone says, "How did you make that?" The hard line today is that.
The assumption is
that you collaged it in the computer. The assumption is you manipulated it somehow. And does it where does it matter that you did or didn't do that?
And it's all about context. It's often photography's conundrum, especially today in the digital arena, that yes, you could scan every negative, you could remake them, you could try new papers, you could do this. That's a kind of reinvention.
And we have done that with some of the work. I mean, some of the work's
called
for that.
But the majority of it.
But the majority of what we're showing.
Created when it was created. And speaks to not only to the ideas that evolved in that project, but speaks also to the process used or the materials used. That someone came through the show yesterday and said, what's fascinating to me is that none of this could be created today. And that was a very profound observation.
Most people don't realize that, but when something in the show, and there's about 200 pieces in the show, says vintage, that usually means that the paper that it was made on is no longer in existence. That it literally could not be made at this time in that way. And to be aware of the subtlety of, yes, there are beautiful prints being made with inkjet printers, and I love the flexibility we have now with that new medium. And yet there is a beauty to a silver print that was made on vintage paper that had so much silver in it that it actually looks different. There's a beauty in a platinum print or a cyanotype. Sorry. That each of those media have an expression. And that's some of what we pulled here.
And I brought up the idea that the whole examination that we're doing is not a linear examination, but a cyclical examination, that in your creative process, things resurface. Things that were conscious, subconscious, processes reemerge, and that what this affords us is the opportunity to look back and see connections. And it's really all about those connections and the cycles of creation. To me, that's the core of what getting to know the map is. And so some of the dialogue too, that you have periods in life, and for us that studied photography and art and history, and that it's easy to fall into an academic role in that, this work was made when I was learning or forming myself, and I think some of the things we did was not fall into that. This was academic creation. That some work transcends time. I have a great example in that Kate was reluctant to put her quilt up that she did as an undergraduate student. And I felt there was a profound connection between the quilt and what she did in Skies for Mom 3 decades later, which is a crochet piece with a photograph every day of 1 year looking to the north sky, reflecting upon the loss of her mother. And that they both dealt with family issues, and ironically, they were similar in color. Someone actually pointed that out in the show, that the palettes were the same. But I will tell them that Naked Kate had to leave, and we had to put in Friendly Kate.
Definitely.
So they had Naked Kate in there, and now it has it still has
Tortured Kate.
No, I think that's still sensual Kate.
I actually prefer. It's interesting because I prefer this Kathy
and it's the
doll.
first time it's in it, right? Oh, Kathy. Sorry, it's a Kathy
doll.
not a Kate.
Yeah.
This piece had a lot of comments. I mean,
I don't know that anyone ever saw that.
I tried to lift it for a few people.
Yeah.
The family underneath. It's an amazing piece, Kate.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, and again, when we talk about what's now and what's in the future, I mean, one of the pieces for me is I'm very interested in doing some more installations with cyanotype and some more things using the power of fabric to fill a space, and so it's it's been really nice to have this here.
Earlier I talked about the power of Skies for Mom juxtaposed down the hall to the quilt and the color palettes, and something I'm really curious about, Kate, is whether you were aware of the quilt. And obviously the quilt was still in its storage area before we brought it out for the show, but when you were making this, was that in there, or was it a subconscious thing? What was it?
No, I don't think the relationship that is now existing in the show, I wasn't aware of that. I mean, this was very much, it was multiple things. There was a worldwide knitting project that I'd already decided to take part in.
Oh, really?
Called Knit the Sky. And I knew I was going to crochet because I don't knit. And so I planned to do that. And at that time, my mother was very ill. And then when she died, I decided to start on the day that she died, which was June 15th, 2011. And so every day I would photograph the sky. So this represents 1 year of skies. And
I remember being around for quite a few of those
skies.
Oh,
yeah.
Gotta do the sky for Mom.
And so it was just a little moment. I did the images were all made with the iPhone. That way of going for the simple tool, the tool that will work for the project, not being self-conscious about that. And that every day it was just a moment to stop and say, thank you for this amazing person. Thank you. Thanks, Mom. Just look at the sky. And then I began to crochet the colors of the sky into the scarf.
At the same time?
Yeah. I mean, I worked on it. But one of the reasons I actually did the skies was because I knew I couldn't keep up with the crocheting. So the idea was that someday I'd finish the scarf. And as it says in the installation, my mother died on June 15th, 2011. The next day I began to photograph the sky. Each day for 1 year, I would turn north, think of Mom, and take a photograph. Each day my photograph was a small hello to this amazing woman. Each sky a reminder of the gifts she gave me. Now it is 2 years since we lost her. My sky scarf, which I knit to echo the skies of that year, is undone and in process, much like my grief. I love you, Mom. Thank you. So one of the things, it was interesting, and I certainly did a number of the days in the scarf, but the fact that I keep on thinking about finishing it. I think about coming to the next end, and it's just not time yet, and it's really interesting. It was really important that every day I took the picture, and I have that record, and that we could count. I did many of the days in the crocheting.
I love that it's unfinished.
And once it was presented like this, and it's been in a few exhibitions, and I've shared it a few different ways like this. It seems right now. Mm-hmm. I can see that there could come a time to finish it, and then that would come to another presentation of it.
Maybe you should never finish it, don't finish life. Yeah.
I don't know. And I think it's like a lot of things we talk about: finishing the show, finishing the books, finishing a project.
What does finishing mean?
Yeah, in some ways this is a finish. It is a pause.
Right.
And it may come a time to keep crocheting on it and bring it to the next step.
Yeah. We started the project with the idea of looking back in order to move forward.
Right.
And that you come to this place in your creative life, our creative lives, and 40 years, so you get a mile marker. You look at, you choose, it's almost like a choice. So 40 years comes up and we say, wow, where are we now? Where has this path been? Where has it taken us? And by putting all of the work out to see where we were and what we did, it was a point of departure, a diving board of sorts to move on. What do you want to make next? Why did you make what you did? And what did it mean, and what does it say?
Well, and I think that all of our work, we're always mining the past, because we have most often worked in traditional photography. And so we are going back to negatives that never have been printed, never in some cases been looked at, to pull new material, new mixes, remixing them. And so it was really interesting to see what we had chosen to print, what we have chosen to make into book projects, and to look at it and to say, this goes next to this, and what was the connections from the earliest work to the most recent work.
Yeah, and it wasn't about rebuilding either. When you say pulling negatives, yes, we looked at images that were from the past, but we tried to emphasize finished art pieces.
Why don't you tell the story about the Polaroid? Because I think that was pretty powerful.
Yeah. I can tell it to the world, that I had just come off the Ansel Adams workshop, and one of the things we had there, you weren't there, Kate, but you remember the era of Polaroid, and just Ansel was supplied with so much more Polaroid than you could ever use, and so we were just showing tests and peeling off and throwing garbage cans full. Here we are in Yosemite, speaking of nature and the majesty of the natural environment, and we're filling garbage cans with this photo waste, and I was just so overwhelmed by it. And I didn't know how to deal with it, and it's always been a bit of a nemesis for me as a photographer, the idea of waste. So I made this series where I took the Polaroid tear-off piece, the one you normally throw away, and not only saved it, but fixed it. And then basically, it was way before digital, it's 1980, and photographed it on a large copy negative, and then took that sized copy negative and etched zinc plates, a plate for each color, and ran them through a printing press, an etching press, to talk about the extreme of waste by going through all of this process to communicate the idea, the concept of waste. I feel like it still works. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It still works over all this time.
And they're kind of monoprints, right?
Oh yeah, they're monoprints. Yeah.
Interesting.
Feels nuts, but.
Well, I think it really is a following through in an artistic way of a spark that both talks about your experience at the Ansel Adams workshop, talks about how much you valued that experience to preserve it, and at the same time, how you still had your concern with ecology, your concern with the world, and really asking questions about the whole process of making things.
And it's now, for example, working in digital media and being so excited about trying to perfect bamboo paper, which, is like 90% grass and as close as I feel I can get to not using up too many resources
Right.
in making pictures.
Right.
Looking at pieces that are so familiar, that have been in so many exhibits over the years, that come back to ideas and concerns, like the idea of containing nature, which was always a part of this photograph, but it's at the same time it's so magical and cheerful. And no, actually, I just didn't want to get into a lecture thing. I just wanted to really be thoughtful about how we look at stuff ourselves. That I call that morning walk. I didn't call it, contained tree, or, there's something interesting there that I know the reason for it was the fascination of that containment. But in reality, there's a cooperation that they built their damn fence around their tree. They worship the tree so much that the pickets are custom little pickets. There's so many layers of meaning. I guess that's where I was going with it, Kate. And I like that this has afforded us the time to live with particular pieces in a different way. You have exhibits, and a lot of times they're not in the area, or you go to an opening, or how many times do you do like Edward West and go sit and have lunch at the MoMA, because your show's there, right? And this has given us that opportunity, which I really love. Tell us about Peace Camp. Because really that was you.
We went to Sweden, and we had found out about this peace camp that was happening for, at that time, USSR, Swedish, Danish, Norwegian, and American children. And we were able to get invited to come and visit them for a part of the camp. And during that time, I made the portraits that are in the hallway here. And we've just juxtaposed that with your work from the Nuclear Visions. And in the book, actually, they'll also have the postcards, because part of what came out of that experience was People for Peace postcards, a postcard series that I did. It was interesting that we didn't put it in the show, but it seems very compelling in the book.
Yeah, it'll be in the book, yeah. I always remember that postal carrier that sent you a note because he was delivering your cards.
Yeah.
And noticed them. What another world, another time, in the era of only emails. Heck with emails. How about just tweets?
Right.
That these postcards, these physical manifestations of hope.
And that was really the idea, both of doing the portraits and of having the children learn from each other and being part of that experience.
Yeah. I love putting these side by side with Nuclear Visions, which we'd never done, and I feel like it takes and puts hope into my work that felt a little despairing. It was that time when I was obsessed with the potential of worldwide destruction and nuclear war, and we both felt compelled.
Well, I think it's interesting too with this particular work is the fact that it never had really been seen. I mean, this is the first time it's been put together like this, but in some ways it was so important, and it was shown in a few places, but it wasn't seen in the same way that we've been able to exhibit some of the other work. And really putting it together here was an important piece of the show, sort of a realization of one thread of what we did.
Working with the little plastic camera, which later became so popular and was so integral to having the ability to do these pictures, because I was seen as just a little fly on the wall, almost like someone innocent crossing back and forth across the police lines and dancing that edge. I just love what we've done here, though, with the the boy at the peace camp, but that was the American boy, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. On the American
And the
boy.
Democratic National Convention, and putting them side by side with the arms and the hope and our children, you know. This is probably the most moving section of the show for me. You know, as far as deep thoughtfulness of what you can do with your photography.
Mm-hmm.
God, if there's something I could wish for people, is to just get quiet times like this with shows, you know?
Yeah, sometimes everyone seems to be just running through.
Yeah, such
Or-
a social environment.
Or
too.
becomes the one chance they have to visit, and
Yeah.
how do they ever see the work?
Yeah.
It's difficult.
As the time's gone, I really feel the encapsulation of groups of bodies of work that are very lasting. Like the juxtapositions we did here in the San Joaquin project are different than a show that traveled throughout the whole state. You know, that it was never hung this way.
Right, right. Well, and I think what has also impacted our experience of this is the fact that we're making the catalog. And so we're reliving with the work, and we're reorganizing the work, and we're seeing it, using the sequence of the show as a skeleton, and yet we're fleshing it out with more insights, hopefully, into the larger bodies. And that's a really exciting process, and I think that the catalog will last, and it feels like it's going to last. With your own work and our own work, and the fact that although we've both been doing photography for 40 years, we've also been together probably about a few of those, a lot of those years.
35 of them,
35 of them.
36.
So, I mean,
yeah.
we'd been doing photography for 4 or 5 years before we got together. But so a majority of our photo careers were parallel. We know the work. We know the ones we really like. We even know sometimes the ones that I think are really important for me and Geir doesn't like. We both are very clear about what we think, and often have very strong
But
opinions.
there's trust. I mean,
Well, there is trust.
The idea of trust.
Right, and that we know that we're both trying to get to the deeper meaning of any piece of artwork, whether it's a show or a singular piece or a portfolio or a book. We don't always agree. I mean, I think we have, and it's actually interesting, one of the most profound experiences at a show, that we had a joint show in Pittsburgh, and older photographer came up.
That was a good one.
And and it was a lovely show. The people were lovely, but we didn't really know anybody, and everyone's just walking up and saying, "Look, we love your work. Thank you.
Pittsburgh, PA.
We love your work. Thank you so much." And it was like very surface, because we didn't know these people, and they were just going and saying it's lovely. But this older photographer came and walked up to me, and he looked.
He was an FSA photographer.
And he was an FSA photographer whose name I'm not going to be able to say. But and he says, "That picture over there, I really thought it was one of yours, and it turns out that it's your husband's." And it was like the most important moment of that evening, because he actually looked, and it was a picture that bridged our work in many ways. Although it was Geir's picture, it had a softness and a fragility that is more common in my work. And that someone looked that deeply to see both the commonality and differences between the way we approach the image.
Well, that perhaps speaks to the overlap that you're asking about, that yes, we can work as each other's critics, but at the same time there's an influential aspect to each of our creative processes that is another part of that gift, as I like to call it.
Well, and there comes a time sometime in the creative process where either of us will say, "Thank you very much, and this is how I'm going to do it." I want to bring here, because one of the things we have done is certainly we're collaborators with each other, but we also have other collaborators, and that's been very important for both of us, because working with Don Drake of Dreaming Mind, or Alan McKinney, who is an incredible printmaker, for us brings in another voice and another way to bounce off of someone else, and brings another dimension to the work.
And collaboration takes work, because you do have to let go of ego, and so that you're able to listen.
I mean, I don't know. I think letting go of ego might not be the way I would put it.
How would you say it?
You have to let go of a finished concept Because it's not about ego. It's about
you're right.
that you already have a
You have a
vision of what
conception and you have a direction it's
and so
going
then you have to be
I'm with
open
you.
to the ebb and flow of other people's ideas.
Because your preconceived idea will get in the way of hearing what that other person has to offer.
Right. And getting to that next step in the final product. You're going to be sad when it comes down?
No, I don't think so. We did something interesting. We want the show to be so intact that we purchased a flat file for the show. And so it's going as it is, carefully bagged into one flat file. And no, I think it's time for it to come down and start working on some new work. Mm-hmm. I feel inspired. I feel thoughtful, deeply thoughtful. And Lord willing, we have another 40. Right?
That would be nice.
Yeah. Well, you will for sure. Because your goal is to be Georgia O'Keeffe, so you need that 40.
Georgia O'Keeffe and Ruth Bernhardt. I'm gonna, I figure, if you survive that long, it's everyone's going to be interested in the work, so it's a good thing.
That's right. Longevity.
Longevity
is, you live long enough, you keep showing, and you don't stop. Finally, somebody says, they're not going away. Guess we better notice them.
Well, I will say we're working on the catalog of the show, which is, so in some ways it's interesting that the show is not yet over. When the catalog is done, that's when I'll feel the show is over. And I'm continued to learn more about the work, about the sequence that we did. The catalog will not be precisely the sequence in the show, but it's very close. Very close, with some more in depth on certain projects. So, and so it's really interesting that's where. So it's almost like it's not over. Getting the show up was a step, having the first event, and now this.
I can keep my mountain going. It's really getting to a nice viewpoint, I think, is what the show is. Reflecting down, looking down the mountain. I know you love my mountain thing, so. And seeing where you've been, and then seeing what's up towards the peak of where you're going to continue going. So in a way, you're able to always be looking down and up at the same time. The greatest gift of doing a retrospective-esque show like this is to look and say, yeah, it's good. The path is good. And look forward to doing more. The reemergence of motifs, concepts, modes of working, and that cyclical nature of the creative process. Mm-hmm. I love that the show gives us a reminder of how important that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I photographed that kind of crazy cloud, the alien-looking cloud at Bodie, and I had it in that show in San Francisco, and that woman walks up and she says, I want to talk to you about one of your photographs. Oh, yeah, sure, which one? She said, there's something about it that you probably aren't aware of. And she says, that's a shroud for an alien spacecraft. I said, oh my gosh, I'm so glad. I didn't know that. She said, I didn't think you did, and I thought you should be aware of it.
You want to talk about creative direction that came out of maybe hanging this show? Any specifics about that, or?
How do we do that without talking about Trump?
No Trump, sorry.
Let's not digress.
I got a Trump reflex back there. Yeah. You can't use any of this. You do realize that. Yeah. We'll have to take you out if you use any of this. We know where you live.
Cannot stop.